Going to be this site and all of you and our time together and where we want that to go. So let me give you a sense of sort of the elements that we have that are primary. I've laid out a large fancy Japanese pruning tool set in the truck. Introduction to the pruning tools I find is one of the more universally beneficial things because these are not tools that the Home Depot wants you to know exist. These are not American-made tools, which barely exist. There were awesome American-made tools, but those companies have all been ripped to pieces now, and they make planned obsolescence things in other countries, and they're designed to fail, and you know they're going to fail because there's like a part where all the stress is, and they make it weak. They make it out of plastic, and they don't design. Yeah, we'll talk about that stuff. So these are mostly fine Japanese tools. There's a shop in Berkeley called Hita Tool, which is your one-stop everything Japanese amazing tool source. Hitatool.com is available to you to order things. Highly recommend exploring that place. Everything from your fingernail clippers to your kitchen knives to your cabinetry and carpentry tools to bamboo.
Wow.
To
How do you spell that? Hita?
Hida.
I want to go there so bad now.
It's the best place on earth. Yeah, you can order, and it's from Berkeley, so they'll show up. And the idea is that they're just really well made. We'll talk about the lineages and why in a moment, but we've got a nice journey into hand tools and extension tools, basic care and use and maintenance and safety and sterility, and so that's sort of the grounding element. We've got the existing fruit trees planted over here, and we can use them to talk about fruit tree structure and training and pruning and what to do when this is what you have now. So a lot of times what happens is you buy a tree from the nursery and you see, I bet the nursery gave me exactly the structure that I want. They're giving me a tree that's been developed optimally. And it turns out that lowest labor costs, like everybody else, is probably what they've been doing. So if you don't adjust the structure of the tree at the time of planting, you may set yourself upon a path that is suboptimal, in which there would have been other options if other choices were made, but having not been made, you are now on that path, and we can look at what to do in the fresh start version and what to do with this is what we've got, and we're going to work with it. And that's probably what we're going to find over here. So we've got all that here. We can do some actual pruning. I can do some demonstrations. You can do a little bit. We don't have a lot of time, so we can't do that much. So we'll have to decide where the value in time is. Location number 2 over here. Over there. I don't know if you can see the smoke from the fire, but the little fire pit over there. They have a site where they want to put in a community food forest. It's a raw site, incomplete design. So we're looking at, putting a bunch of trees in the ground might be premature. We don't know. So we're going to probably have more of a design conversation and a demonstration of what to do, but we might not actually fully put it in the ground. But we've got some bare root fruit trees over there. I've got 2 broad forks. I've got some mycorrhizal fungal spore inoculum. I've got my compost extract bag, and we can talk through how I plant trees in a kind of regenerative-ish vision of how to prepare the site, how to put the tree in the ground, and then we'll do what's appropriate. And we'll look at a bunch of the bare root trees to see what are you receiving. Because sometimes you receive a whip, which is just a single stem stick, might be 5 feet tall, not very big in diameter. That is the easiest to redirect to where you want to go. The older the bare root is you get, the higher diameter it is, the more lateral branching it already has, the more your pathways are limited, or they are uncertain. Or it might be roll the dice. 2 out of 3, it's going to wake up. 1 out of 3, it's going to die, and you killed it. Because you didn't want to work with what you had, you wanted something better, and you made a choice, and it didn't work out. So we're going to talk through all that stuff on that site. So there's a lot of variation on where we can wind up over there, but it'll be fun. So we've got about 2 hours and change in our official time. Unofficially, you'll let me know what you want to do. Let me give you guys a quick intro to who I am and why I'm the one saying these words to you, and then we'll get into tools, we'll look at stuff over here, and we'll get rolling. So my name's Dominic Allamano. I style what I do as urban agroforestry. I have been involved in urban food system renewal in the Rogue Valley in Southern Oregon in the 2000s decade, where I had a small farm up there and hosted a lot of World Cafe community dialogues on the future of the regional food system, the future of the regional economy. Did a lot of weaving, like in that era, the Ron Paul and Dennis Kucinich camps together as kind of the progressive libertarians and the progressive progressives, and said, hey, we don't want war, we don't want empire, we want a bioregionally sound community and culture and economy, and we're better off working together on that than getting into the binary nonsense of our larger political system. Then I moved home to my hometown of Sacramento, where I grew up on the greenbelt of the American River back in the 80s, when you could be a wild kid in the city and have critters and creatures everywhere and roam around the woods. And I had a lot of adventures with my dad and my grandfather and my brother, trout and steelhead fishing all over Northern California, including up in these parts from the Klamath to the Pit to Shasta, Lassen, the Feather. Got to roam around all over the place. And my family's been in Northern California since 1900. So I have a lot of memory in my family of things that you cannot see anymore in the wild world. So I grew up with a grandfather who was a proper Italian-American elder and a master steelhead fisherman. And I got a lot of great cultural memory through him of things that are not evident any longer. So a lot of the work that I do is trying to pull that memory that most of us don't have, because everybody in California moved here 5 minutes ago from somewhere else on the planet, and their ancestors are in other lands. Their memory and their culture is in other land. Their land stewardship skills are other plants and other contexts and other times. And now people just live in cities and neighborhoods and suburbia, and they import everything they need to live in one of the most agriculturally productive places on earth. And everything we grow for export, because California was developed as an export global economy element in the late 1800s, when Central Valley wheat fed British peasants. And on it has gone from there. So we've never really built regional food systems. We don't know how to live here. We never had to figure that out, because we've only developed in the modern global economy kinds of sense. And the 90s globalization forward really ripped apart whatever regional economies and systems we have. So a lot of work now is, how do we reconnect to our places? We're at the Watershed Council. That's the perfect structural framing for a biological unit of physical and biophysical flows of energy into which to organize human culture and society. In a lot of ways, it's how do we resolve the legacies of the past, mining and logging and poor development choices, and restore the functionality of that living system. Bringing beavers back is a great example, or mimicking those functions. So I do this in an urban context. In Sacramento, in North Sacramento and South Sacramento, neighborhoods and all around the area, and have been a part of the farm to fork capital of the known universe work in Sacramento, which is a self-declared thing, so I can put whatever scale I want on it, because there's no data behind it. We just made it up because it could be something that's true. It's not. But it could be, because we grow 250 different specialty crops in the region. In the 6 counties around Sacramento, you have the valley, the delta, and the foothills. 98% of those are grown for export. 98% of what we eat is imported. We're a giant company town, just like all y'all were back in the day. We have no plan. And so what I try to do is stimulate the larger cultural evolution scaffolding. How do we live here well together for the long term, being people from all over planet Earth in a radically transformed landscape with lots of the living world no longer in evidence? The city south of Sacramento, Elk Grove. No one has ever seen an elk there. There was 500,000 elk in the Great Valley 200 years ago. 500,000 pronghorn antelope in the Great Valley. 10,000 grizzly bear. The bear on the flag of California is a grizzly bear. Grizzlies have been extinct since 1917 in California. So we have this radical change. You could talk salmon, massive biophysical movement of nutrients from the ocean into the interior. Everything was made of salmon. What happens when everything was made of salmon and there are very few salmon or no salmon? Gradual decline. The flyway used to have billions and billions of birds eating things and pooping them out somewhere else, moving microbes and seeds and stimulating and eating and all these great mechanisms of life that made this place so magnificent aren't really here that much anymore. So it's us. And that's why composting is great, because it's biomimicry of nutrient cycles. It's capturing high embedded embodied energy food imported from elsewhere, catching it and storing it in a form that will be a legacy benefit for your community. That high embedded embodied energy food imported from faraway places is a legacy of the one-time planetary endowment of hydrocarbon fuel sources and the global economy, depleting other people's ecosystems and exploiting other people's labor so we can have cheap food year-round, out of season, out of cycle, and assume that in perpetuity. Thus, we don't need to grow food in our regions to feed ourselves. We don't need a plan because the dollar will rule the world forever, right? Because every human complex civilization and empire that have ever existed still exists, right? Actually, we have failed every single time. They have all collapsed, and we are currently in the plateau wobbly phase of our current global civilization and U.S. empire kind of game and dollar dominance. So big changes are going to happen for the benefit of the rest of humanity and to the detriment of our exploitatable peak of dominance that we have all lived in an entirety of our lives within. This is awkward. We are maladapted. We have ideas about how things work that are not how they work and are definitely not how they're going to work. And this is going to happen probably faster than we're ready for because the multipolar or multinodal world, as opposed to unipolar US-dominated world since the collapse of the Soviet Union, that era is over. And we are now in the transition where the rest of the world is organizing themselves for their mutual benefit and not for Europe and the US to run everything and exploit it. Because our leaders are not competent and they can tell that. And we are dangerous, and so there's all this stuff. So fruit trees and compost are essential because they are about the long-term cycles of relationship and stewardship of our places. Annual veggie gardening is a great gateway drug, but it is not a sound long-term foundation for a society. It is deteriorating of an ecosystem fundamentally, and it needs to be augmented from outside sources or other land that's grown for cover crops or compost to bring fertility back in. So why fruit trees and compost are great is because they get us in longer time cycles. They stretch out our awareness and our consciousness. Fruit trees can be, how old do you guys think the oldest fruit tree is?
80.
And what kind? Tell me kind and duration.
Pear trees
Avocados,
over
80.
100.
What was that?
Pear trees over 100.
Over 100 pear tree.
Apple trees, a couple hundred years old.
Very old.
Yeah. Avocados.
Avocados.
Do nut trees count as fruit trees?
What's that?
Do nut trees count as fruit trees?
They certainly can.
Oh.
I mean, it's a food tree.
200 years.
Yeah.
Oh, walnut, yeah.
Or can you consider oak trees as a food tree because
Do-
you can eat they? Yeah, how are we classifying?
There you go. Well, so we have fruit and then we have nuts. And nuts are a distinct category, but they are part of our food system. So we give you a few numbers here. So I had an 80-year-old grapefruit tree in Sacramento. It was 40 feet tall. Trunk was that big on it, 1,000 pounds of fruit a year. Those are all over the old Sacramento, riparian neighborhoods. So there's that as a food. There are 100-year-old plus fig trees in California that have naturalized and live wild in our landscapes, inhabiting niches around the oak similar to what an elderberry might have back in the day. Kind of sunny edges of a grape tree. In the U.S., the oldest fruit tree is a pear. There's a pear tree in Massachusetts. Woo! The original governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony brought a cutting of a pear tree from his estate in England to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, planted it in the 1600s. The tree is, I think it's in like the 430-year-old range. President John Adams visited the tree in 1800 as part of his presidential inaugural tour. That's how this tree was prominent then. It's still there. Ne'er-do-wells chainsawed it at some point, and they've rebuilt it after that, after it lost its upper structure. So you have that kind of stuff. Oldest fruit tree in the world are the olives in the Mediterranean. 3,000 to 5,000 plus years old.
Wow.
Nut trees, it's hard because this is one of those things like I talk about the animals that aren't here, but the great oaks aren't here either. And if you've seen the kind of oak trees that used to be around California, the Chico folks here, there's the Hooker Oak Park. Yeah, in like the 79, the lightning got it. But at the ground, it's 16 feet with its flare across the stump. So you had and they thought it was one tree. It turned out it was two trees that had merged together. They were about 600 years old. These trees could be 1,000 years old or more. 100-foot branches on the trees, massive. And they were the foundation of food because the acorn is not the world's greatest food, but it is an abundant food with some time and preparation. A little bit better tree fruit is the chestnut. And part of the story, that I get to tell is that I've discovered after already getting into the stuff that's my lineage. My family is from the Alps in Italy, in the Aosta Valley, where all the 15,000 foot alpine peaks are. Kind of like Auburn to Tahoe, lower village as it climbs up the valley. Embedded in a forest of chestnuts that can live 2,000 or more years. There's a 4,000-year-old chestnut in Sicily they call the tree of 100 horses because a princess and her entourage camped under it in a rainstorm one time. It's a clonal tree, so it's like shoots everywhere. So it's just this massive 4,000-year-old. You could put 100 horses under it. It was that big. So my family's culture was in a place where you had these 1,000-year-old or more trees that were 100 or more feet tall, and the nut can be ground into flour and you can bake bread from it. And so it's a storage crop. It replaces your annual. It's also your hog food. It's also building material. It's also firewood. It can be managed in coppice as a biomaterials economy. There's an amazing culture in the Alps in Europe, in the kind of intermediate zones where the chestnut was the anchor. Much like in Appalachia in the US, where it was the anchor before a blight wiped them all out. Part of the blight story is also a fertility story because the passenger pigeon was the source of poop for those forests. And when we wiped out the passenger pigeons, we weakened the chestnuts, and then a blight was brought in by fancy plant people in Washington, D.C., bringing a Chinese chestnut variety in, and something like 6 billion chestnut trees died. And these trees Appalachia was a rich country. Peasants could gather chestnuts and make their year's income in that single season. So these long-term relationships of place and culture are kind of the game. We don't have it. We don't know how to live in our places. We have way too many people in them. We've depleted all the biological mechanisms that built the fertility and fecundity and the life force in them. The gifts from the ocean of salmon, probably not coming back in the scale, other than maybe the Klamath, but the ocean's a mess. The wild salmon are full of plastic now. So it's awkward. We live in awkward times. So the game here is that the relationship to fruit trees is a great gateway to longer time cycles of stewardship. Composting is a nutrient cycling relationship. When you start to play both of those games together, you are now in the flow of living energy and in relationship to the long term of your place. And we need to figure out cultures of all of us from all over the world living here now together that make sense for the long term. So this is a great place to start wherever you are to play that game. So that's sort of introductory foundational layer. If you want to hear a little bit more about this kind of stuff and other things, there's a video from the original compost training in Sacramento where I gave an hour talk that riffs on this and more, but that's probably all I'm going to say for today. So what I do with that in Sacramento is I prune fruit trees professionally and have for the last 8 years. And a lot of that, it's very different than like a professional commercial orchard where you got a plan and your crew knows the plan. And you get the trees and you implement the plan consistently. And so the trees make sense and they're similar and they're structured well. And so seasonal pruning is very minimal because they're concerned about labor costs. So they got to do all that well. In the city, nonsense, squared. People do weird things. They know things that aren't true. They use dull tools, and that's the best Mark Twain line. It's not the things that people know that gets them in trouble. It's the things that they think to be true, but they ain't. Something like that. That's our society right now. We vigorously are implementing a lot of untrue things that we're very confident in. Mm-hmm. So I find trees in whatever state they're in with whatever legacies they have, and I do that puzzle. How do I resolve this into the best foundation for the future? Restore the soil biology, nurture the tree in its recovery so there's less stress that helps it deal with fungal rot and damage and other issues. Nurture the context, the habitat, the biodiversity, the predators and pollinators and creatures that form that larger web of life. And then mentor the humans, the wild cards in the system, to try to bring them into better relationship and more competent stewardship. So I support a lot of community organizations, many of which are our compost hubs now. A lot of them I've been working with for 5, 10, even longer than that. And then I support on fruit tree projects, the Sac Tree Foundation from time to time, and Tree Davis in Yolo County, and try to move all these things in a cultural evolution, how do we live here well together long-term bit, and a climate resilience element. How do we make our landscapes more flexy for when it gets too hot, too cold, too windy, too dry, all the things that we're seeing in LA right now, where it was super wet for 2 years They had historic vegetation growth, grass and brush. Then you have a super hot summer, grass and brush become fuel, and then it hasn't rained yet. There's no rain all fall. We've got tons of rain up here. Southern California hasn't had a drop yet. And then you get 100-mile-an-hour winds coming down here. And so this is what we call hydroclimate whiplash. Extreme shifts between hot cycles and wet cycles and dry cycles and cold cycles that leave very vulnerable exposed edges where resilience you bend, brittleness you break. And that's kind of the game. Restore carbon cycle functionality, restore water cycle functionality, restore habitat and biodiversity and nutrient cycling, and build a culture that knows how to live in place. While the world is changing, the U.S. World War IX, we have a very awkward, uncertain future, and that's why I hang out fruit trees and compost piles. Because every future that isn't some science fiction nonsense, fruit trees and compost piles are a critical part of it. So they become a journey that we can take. So that's the journey we're going to take today. That's all the bigger context for why these things matter a lot more than just, isn't it fun to have a fruit tree in your yard? But that's true too. So any questions or comments in the sort of initial introduction?
Give it a plot.
And other things.
One of the things I think I know that is true, that may not be true, is that the oldest tree species on the planet is actually the Bristol cone tree. Is that true?
Bristol cone.
It is true.
Yes.
Okay. Well, you heard
That
it
we
here.
know of, yeah. Yeah, so we got the tallest up here in the redwoods, the sequoia, or the volumetrically grandest, and then the bristlecone pine in like the White Mountains in the Southern Sierras. They're the oldest, and you're not supposed to even go see them because they're like that big.
They don't really tell you where they are exactly.
They don't.
right?
No,
Like the
Methuselah is
oldest
the
one.
oldest tree. Nobody's allowed to know where it is. And they grow super slow out of the granite, and like a 5,000-year-old tree is like 8 feet tall. And the scraggliest looking elder you've ever seen.
And they survive fires.
Yeah, will they survive the modern world? The Southern Sierras may become shrubland and lose their forests. That's the concern right now, is we've lost so much of the forest, the heat is moving north, the desert is encroaching, and we are... there's a great book called Dirt, the Erosion of Civilizations by David Montgomery, part of a series of soil books. You should have access to all of them in your life. And basically the line is that humans march through the forest with deserts dogging our heels. Civilization.
I've got 2 of his books back at the lodge.
Yes. We have done a really good job of creating short-term complex societies that degrade the foundations biophysically of their existence and eventually unravel and become deserts. The Tigris and Euphrates, the Fertile Crescent, the city of Uruk, where the Epic of Gilgamesh is from, the oldest written narrative of this culture, is under like 50 feet of dust. It looks like the moon if you put a ancient structure on it. But that's why we're regenerating things, so we don't befall that same thing that every other complex human civilization has before us. We're going to be different this time, right? Right?
Hey!
All right, let's look at tools. Yeah. So here's the way I look at it. You get like a bell curve distribution of potential futures. Cut off the best case scenario and cut off the worst case scenarios because you don't have to do anything and you can't do anything. You design for up to the point where nothing you do matters. It gets you the bulk of possible futures, and it's also psychologically healthier. There's very little you could have done in the Palisades to 100-mile-an-hour winds. I have 1,000 friends that moved to Western North Carolina to create their regenerative farms, sustainable lands and then a year of rain fell in 6 hours or whatever. You're all embedded in larger systems, and those larger systems are influenced by things that you have very little influence over. You just kind of have to become okay with it, because if you can psychologically disappear into the darkness of things that are true, but there are scales at which we have impact, and you focus on those. And that's why pruning tools are great, because you can turn dollars into things that will amplify your human creative abilities over long periods of time, and you could learn to care for them and fix them and sharpen them, and then these things are like for a lifetime. And so that's the idea here, is to introduce you to the different types of tools and the different things that they do really well, and how to get them and how to care for them, and then a little bit of how to utilize them. So you have hand pruning tools, your basic primary. They come in fancy to simple versions to plastic nonsense versions. You can spend $12, you can spend $250. Probably don't need to spend $250. Probably shouldn't spend $12. So I'll show you some of the stuff in the middle. And then we have extension versions of that. And then we go up to loppers and extension versions of loppers. And then we go to many types of different saws and extension versions of saws. Safety equipment, sterilization, sharpening, cleaning, lubricating, protecting. So we're going to do kind of a run through of all that stuff. So I'm going to pass some stuff around as we go so you can handle a few of these. I'm going to do this faster than I normally do. A lot of workshops, this is 45 minutes and I'm doing a 4-hour session. So we're going to do this a little faster. This is the cheapest thing I would recommend you buy. This is the basic Corona, maybe $30 these days, $20 before the inflation monster ate us. These tools are made pretty well. Key is single pieces of metal. There is a connective tissue here that you can take apart. The cheaper ones are designed so you cannot take them apart, which means you might not be able to clean it, relubricate it, you might not be able to properly sharpen it, clean rust off of it, and those are things you're going to have to do for the tool to last. So it has a mechanism that you will find familiar. That's a key thing when you're buying something. It opens up nice and wide, so you can get a sharpening tool in there. Some of them will only open up like that, and so you really can't get in there to sharpen it by design. And if you clean this and you learn how to clean rust, which there's a million different strategies for getting rid of rust. There's vinegar versions and there's baking soda versions and there's egg yolks have sulfur in them and you can use those. Exactly. So go to YouTube and look at how do I get rust off of my garden tools. You'll find a million videos. One of the best ones is by a artisan furniture maker in Maine.
Is it Lane Furniture Company?
I don't remember his name. I'd have to look. But he had like 10 old world techniques and one modern one for how to get rid of rust.
Probably barbecue sauce. It's a trick I learned in Maine. And I saw fire engines in San Francisco cleaning their parts with barbecue sauce one day, and I was like, "You're doing it right."
That's pretty fire.
As I said, everybody's got their own way. It's great. Find one you like. Learn to use it. That's kind of the key there. So these tools are designed for making your basic cuts, and the 3/4 of an inch to an inch maximum, depending on the tool size and your hand size and strength. You don't want to try to use it to make a cut bigger than you can comfortably make with the tool in your hand because you will crush the tissue, and rather than a sharp tool making a clean cut which will heal well, which is our goal in all things, you will crush the tissue, break the bark, have it rot back, and rather than it going that way, it'll go that way, and it'll get all goofy on you and you'll be frustrated. Fruit trees are call and response. You do something, the tree does something. Did it do what you thought it was going to do? So you try to learn how to make the influences on the tree, understanding the tree's biology so that it does what you want, distributing in time and space, good strong structure to hold fruit and stay healthy. So basic tool. So I will start passing that one around. And open it up, squeeze it, notice the spring mechanisms, the feel of it, and just kind of get a visceral sense of that as I pass these different ones around. So the standard professional tool, and this is the only non-Japanese thing basically on the truck bed here, is the Felco pruner. Felco is a fantastic Swiss company. They make a full line of gardening tools. They make many different pruners with large hand, small hand, ergonomic, left hand,
Ooh, left hand.
high capacity, all these different things. They are named in like F2, F4, F14, F6. They are designed to be taken apart. You can buy replacement hardware and springs. You can see this spring here is loose. I need to get a new one on this one. And you can get replacement blades. This Felco F2, kind of the standard model, is probably close to 20 years old. So they last a really long time. And if this was all you ever knew existed, you'd be fine. These are great. Everybody works in orcharding and cut flowers in the nursery trade. Farmers, everybody uses Felcos. Eventually they're going to be $40 to $70 and about $15 for replacement blades or hardware. Now the Japanese tools have a different design. This is from the ARS Corporation, which is similar to Felco, makes a full line of tools. Many things here are ARS. The springs are different, the locking mechanisms are different, and the culture of manufacturing craft is different. And that is because in Japan, The iron towns that made samurai armor and weapons for hundreds of years converted to gardening and farming tools 100 years ago. And they still have the quality and craft and design and integrity in their materials and their designs. They don't do planned obsolescence. It's not designed to break. Like, there isn't a plastic thing where like the stress is going to be, because that would, how could you do that? So,
Dishonorable.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. So these things are made really well, and the materials are great, the design is great, their ability to do what you want really effectively in a professional sense. It's one thing if you're making like 10 cuts. If you're making 100 or 200 cuts a day for months at a time, it's really different. Like, the strain on your wrist, the spring really matters, how much the return is. How long does it stay sharp? How much do you have to sharpen it? These things really matter. So this is about a $90 ARS tool. One of my other programs, it gave me a nice tool budget. I got a number of these for volunteers and for my trainings. And then I'm going to get a bunch of different Felco sizes as well, so that people can see it. So we'll start this over here. And look at the Felco going in the opposite direction. Be aware of the spring is a little loose on that one, just to give you an idea of that things failed. In products, these are called consumables. It's like a bike chain. You're going to need a bunch of them in the life of the bike. So it's good if you can replace the consumable parts of a product. So then we go up to the fancy stuff. This is from a brand called Tobisho. This is made in Yamagata, Japan, one of those iron towns. This facility is like 300 years old. They are under their 8th master. And they make crazy good tools. And so a master artisan sitting at a bench made this from start to finish. It's that kind of a thing. It's not like on a factory line. This is somebody assembling and sharpening, and one person does the full process. And they have a number of different brands in that community that make amazing tools of all kinds. This one's about $110, $120, and you can get versions like this that have a super heavy-duty spring. They're single pieces of metal. There is no bevel on the blade edge, so I can only sharpen this with like whetstones and more delicate things, because this is like a sushi knife. You're not putting heavy, it's super sharp. You're just honing it. And you're not going to cut the chicken wire fence with it. Because if you ding it, it's done. So these are a little bit more, they're amazing, but some of the middle upper grade tools are more replaceable and fixable. So I will pass this around as well. And particularly with this, feel the difference in the spring, in the action on it, like how solid it is. If I didn't know it existed, I wouldn't miss it. But once I got one, it's hard not to use it. Because I prune things year round, I make thousands and thousands and thousands of cuts, and at that scale it really matters. All right, so real quick, there are other cool little things. There are more like fine scissors that you might use for like harvesting pieces of fruit and snipping the stems that are really cool. And there are also lots of really cool bigger tools. This is called a barracuda. This is a cross between a bypass pruner, where the blade goes past the non-bladed side, and a topiary shear. So this is for like woody-ish herbaceous plants. So if you need to like cut all the flower stalks off of your herbaceous plants at the end of the year, you can come through with this thing, grab a bundle of them, and then chop them into pieces in your compost pile. So it's a really kind of nifty specialty tool. You could also shape shrubby things into animal creatures and other stuff, and that's what these things are kind of used for. There's a brand called Niwaki that makes this in Yamagata. They are London-based, and they import Japanese tools into London. They make a bunch of their own stuff. They have their own shop with a bunch of the masters from Tobisho who now work with them. And $100 orders from London get free shipping to the U.S. So Niwaki.com is another place to look in addition to hitatool.com. They have lots of super cool stuff. And there's a whole culture and a whole vibe around this stuff. It's got some depth in it that's worth exploring.
What were those shears called?
Barracudas. So the hand version then goes into the extension version. So this is a 6-foot pole with a piece of orange on it.
Small blade.
It's got a heavy-duty blade, so it's a little bit larger. This is a fixed pole, rotates around. These come in everything from 18-inch to 6 or 7-foot versions. So this gives you, see a slight angle, so this means you can get up, make a nice cut. It's got a cable actuation of the mechanism here. Very nice, made by ARS Corporation, the same one who made one of the Japanese hand pruners. But then there are also some fancy versions. So this one is 6 feet, has an adjustable angle head on it, telescopes out 6 to 10 feet, and rotates around. So now you're 10 feet up, and you can adjust the head angle so you make a cut at the angle you want to make it at.
Does it have a string to catch the branch so it doesn't fall on your head from that height?
No, but there is another version of this tool that has a cut and hold blade.
Yeah.
So you could harvest a delicate persimmon and bring it down, or cut flowers or other things like that.
Yeah.
They're not interchangeable, but you can buy versions of these with that head on it.
Nice.
Thank you. They also come in 4 to 7 foot versions. This is maybe one of the more useful things that you could add to your tool set, because it lets you make all kinds of cuts at a reach from you, from the ground, or on a ladder to really get up there. Super duper healthy, handy thing to have. And the idea is that you can make easy cuts of a new shoot at a place you don't want it when it's easy. If you leave it there, it's like a tree is going to grow in your tree, and then you're going to have to get on a ladder with a saw or loppers. It's going to be a bigger cut. There's more risk involved. There's more wound to the tree. Little tiny wounds, tree doesn't even notice them. You make bigger cuts, it's there, and it's available for disease and insects to get in for a longer period of time.
Are those adjustable head ARS?
Yeah, these are all ARS, yeah. And these are in the $100 to $150 range for tools like that. There are replacement parts for them, though sometimes the replacement parts cost enough where it's like it's only a $100 tool, that's a $50 part, maybe you just buy a new one, I don't know, you'd have to make that decision. But they are designed for that repair, and on the website they'll have a little schematic, little engineering diagram with every part and its name and number, so you can order them if you want. All right, so again, up to about an inch at most. Key idea, green wood, living wood is softer than dead wood. Dead wood is harder and harder to cut, so you will make smaller diameter cuts versus the same tool with green wood. All right, then we go to the lopper. Same bypass mechanism, just a longer handle version. They come in lots of different sizes. They can cut anywhere from an inch to maybe 2 inches on the larger ones. The key with these though is that you got to open up real wide. So this I like because this one's small. This is a vineyard designed one. So this is for pruning grapes is what this is designed for. But you can get in tighter spaces with it. You can, if you need it, you can make a nice cut. I might use this if we were taking a whip, a new bare root fruit tree and making a heading cut to shorten it. This is a tool I might use for that, or a very delicate saw. These are ARS. They have small, medium, large. Now large are pretty far wide open. What I use these for mostly is chopping up debris to put in the green can afterwards, because it's much nicer. It's easy on your back. You got a nice reach on it. You can cut bigger stuff. But in a tree, you've got to have a big opening to be able to use this to its full capacity. Japanese have cool innovations, so they also have these extendable handles.
Super lopper.
But it's nonsense level stretched. But kind of cool for here, or occasional use. But because the Japanese are cool, they also have a design for the longer inches, which is this one.
Oh my god.
This is one of the best tools out there. This can cut up to 1.5 inches, 2 inches. They come in a foot shorter or a foot longer versions of this. The neck is replaceable and the blade is replaceable. Every once in a while, I'll try to cut something that I shouldn't be cutting, and I'll try too hard, and I'll torque it on that screw right there. It'll kink the tube. $20 for a new tube. So I've gone through maybe 6 of them in the last 8 years. This is a fantastic tool. It does rotate around this way. So from the ground level, you can make significant cuts that would be you up on a ladder with a saw or other tool, and instead you're just dink, 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 and you're done. Fantastic tool. Sometimes on sale for under $100, but usually about $120 for one of these of this size. Again, these are tools. Think if you don't need them yourself, your community tool shed in the future, your tool library, These are the kinds of things that if you have access to, they're the exact right tool for the job. Without them, there may not be a right tool for the job that isn't higher risk, more awkward, and less effective. So then we go up, and now we're to saws. And saws come in all shapes and sizes. There's that you need to restructure, or you have a broken limb and because you didn't pay your features and a shattered tree, but you need the bigger tool. So this is what I use for about 80% of the work that I do. Silky, nice tool. They have belt hooks, clips that go on there, and then you can put it on. And now you have your tools, hands free, up, down, working. It's there, my hands are free, it's functional. There are some bigger leather holsters you can get for your pruners that will have folding saw slots in them. So you can carry that around, but the folding saws are not quite as convenient to up and down with. They're more pull out to make a cut or two and then put away. So then everything else is a specialty saw that I only use every once in a while. So one of the cool things with Silky is you'll have a series. So this is the Gomtaro series, and this is called the Pro Sente model. Comes in a longer version, and then there are, with that dual blade, but then there are fine teeth or medium teeth or large teeth on the same blade. And this one, which is a root cutting saw. So this is when you got like root suckers, you need to get in the ground and there's dirt and rocks. So it's a much thicker blade and much bigger teeth. Same handle, same scabbard. I could swap a different style blade onto this same handle to use it, which is important because for some reason no one has given me a good answer for, they have canceled this model. So I'm buying up used blades, or I'm buying up available replacement blades, and I'm encouraging some of my groups to buy other versions of this saw to get the handle, to store the other blade, like buy the root saw, store the blade because you only need it every once in a while, buy this replacement blade and use it because I haven't found anything I'd recommend as highly for basic purposes. So that's the challenge. You cannot buy the combined unit anymore, but there are a lot of replacement blades on the market. So then, specialty, skinny saw for tight spaces. Lets you get in when there's like a tight V and you don't want to damage the tissue behind you, you can get in those spots here. These come in straight or curved blades in many different sizes. You don't need it very much, but it's the right tool for the job when you do need it. And we go up in size. This is the Silky Zubat. So this is a curved blade, larger teeth. This is maybe the primary arborist basic tool in the world. Everywhere you go, this is a tool that everybody respects. This is a really good saw for those 2-inch to 5-inch cuts. Fantastically sharp, really quick, really sturdy. Replaceable blades. Same clip mechanism, so I can have another clip and hook it on. Also, in arborist world, you can put Velcro straps, hook it on to your calf if you're climbing. All right, so another fruit tree one, different brand. This is a brand razor saw that you could get at Hita. This is a saw that I got for my volunteers to use. That's a fruit tree saw they designed. So finer teeth, fine to medium sized teeth, super sharp, skinnier blade. So you're making a thinner cut. The more thicker your blade, the more material you remove, the more work each cut is. So this is really nice for fruit tree stuff. Then occasionally you need an even bigger saw. So I have this one.
Yeah.
This is a big blade. And then occasionally you need a chainsaw, but you don't want to use one or don't have one.
What? Now that's a source.
So people use this, like a lot of folks who have property. Tree falls on the trail. You take this out, it has a sling it can go in, you put over your shoulder out, and you need to clear a segment of a fallen tree, you can use something like this. Now, believe it or not, this is the small version. This is a 500 millimeter blade. It comes in a 650 millimeter blade and a full meter blade. Replaces a chainsaw. No stink, no fuel. You get all the exercise.
And nobody's gonna come at you.
Yeah, lightweight, brilliantly designed, crazy sharp.
How much is one of those?
This one's $250. The 650 is like 3 something, and the meter one is like $1,000. So this is the Silky Katana Boy.
That's a katana. Yeah, it basically is.
Which, to show you now, as we go to the extension saws,
Don't fuck with
it's a katana handle.
Halberd.
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite tools here. So this is a 4-foot saw with a 13-inch blade with a razor hook on the end of it. This lets you hang it in the tree, or it lets you pull debris out of the tree without using the more flexy blade. So at 4 feet, it's really cool, but then I need to get higher. Now it's 8 feet, but it's not tall enough. I need to go higher.
Damn.
So now you have a 12-foot handle and a 13-inch blade. It's lightweight.
That handle too is like so nice.
How much control do you have over the down pressure?
Yeah.
The farther out the blade goes, the wobblier it is. Your personal core strength and shoulder strength, very impactful on a tool like this. Using this a lot in a day is a workout.
Yeah, it is.
So I have some trees that I'll work on where I'm just using these extension tools on an orchard ladder for like 4 to 6 hours straight.
Oh no.
Serious workout. But eventually your body's like, okay, I get it, you're gonna do this, so I'm gonna strengthen up and become resilient, and you owe me a hot spring. And it works out all right.
What a great way to have a relationship with yourself. You owe me a hot spring.
But this saw is oftentimes more than you need in that extended version. So, the final saw I have to show you is a nice place in the middle.
Yeah, like I have a pull saw for this. Yeah.
Ultra lightweight.
Yeah.
Like you could hold this like pinky. Telescopes out 4 to 7 feet. I can work this left-handed at an awkward angle, and I can use this to make cuts with it up in a tree. Another one from Hita Tool, made by Razor Saw, about $70 for this guy. There is a longer version of it, but I like the balance of the heavy-duty one for when it's the right tool, and then this more smaller blade, super lightweight, that I can use when I need a little more reach than I have access to. All right, so those are the basic tools.
What do you have locked in that secret box there? The red one. Yeah.
First aid,
Oh, okay.
safety first, Band-Aids,
Sharp stuff.
a lot of sharp stuff. We'll talk about that. All right, so fruit trees have diseases. You cut into a diseased tree, move it to another compatible tree, you can spread the disease. So in this bottle we have medical grade rubbing alcohol, the 90+%, mixed 3 parts water, 1 part rubbing alcohol. It's a $3.50 spray bottle, professional spray bottle, not a cheap one, designed to have different chemicals in it, and so it gives you a nice fine mist spray, so I can pull a tool out at the beginning of the day. Where do we wind up here? Give it a quick spray. I've now sterilized it. Rubbing alcohol evaporates at ambient temperatures. Easy peasy. Every time you start on a tree, you clean your tools. Every time you switch from one tree to another tree, you clean your tools. And if you're working on a tree with disease, you may clean your tool between every single cut. Most diseases move within plant families, so like apple and pear and quince within the rose family, stone fruit to stone fruit. But it's good as just a practice to be ultra thoughtful and just not mess around. There are apocryphal stories of people that cut into one diseased tree and then cut into 100 more trees on an orchard, spread it to the whole orchard, kill the whole orchard, and then they get fired. So don't be that guy. So then, personal protective equipment. These are really cool. So you guys remember in COVID, if you wear glasses and you had a mask on and it kept fogging up and you're like, and it made you really grumpy? So with fruit trees, you're oftentimes up in a tree, and imagine you're using a saw over your head and sawdust is falling on you. Well, it's nice to be able to see sharp tools and precise cuts. So there are these goggles that have a wire mesh. So there's like 1 millimeter wire openings, and it has a rubber gasket, so it fits on your head real nicely, seals out debris from coming in. Pokey things are not going to get you, and you can see and function, and they don't fog up. $10, nice and easy, fantastically the right tool for the job. I've never found gloves that are the exact right gloves, and I do lament that. So this is the one I use mostly. This is a Home Depot firm grip, $20 heavy duty one. It has carbon fiber knuckles and rubber protection on the knuckles here, and it's a leather palm, and it's pretty high dexterity because you need the balance of dexterity and protection is oftentimes hard to meet. And I like them, but in that planned obsolescence world, so they have this little tab you grab to pull it on, and the stress from that pull goes onto this seam, and they don't use a proper stitch to handle it. So every one of them fails right there. And I have that turns to mush when it hasn't failed in the fingers or other places. So I have a whole collection of these waiting to be sewn back together. But they're $20, and they make it about 6 months at my intensity of use, so that's not so bad. So you want to have some hand protection. There are gloves like the nitrile drip gloves that are cut protection, different ratings for safety equipment, but the cut protection is on this side, and this is the side you're usually going to get with a saw or a tool. It's the hand holding the thing over here, and then and then you get like that knuckle, so that's where you want the protection more than on this side. And the hand here, more than the hand, your tool holding hand is at much less risk than your branch holding hand that's out there with the business owns. All right. So sharpening is a key. Sharp tools, clean cuts heal well. So in the field, there are sharpening tools like these. This is from Hita. This is a diamond file. It has medium grit and fine grit on it. The medium grit, you're not going to need that much, but occasionally you might need to sort of reset a blade, the bevel on it. The fine is the one you might use more just to refine the sharpening of it. This here is a tapered diamond file. Lets you sharpen beveled edges where you have little kind of scalloped notches that you can slide this through, and you can also use this on the blade normally. But every once in a while, like once a year, you might want to take your tools apart, clean the rust off of them entirely, re-lubricate them, put them back together, sharpen everything really nicely, and that's where you get into whetstones. And they're also kind of field whetstones. There's a medium, a fine, and a rough grit that are easier to carry around. And you put these in the water for a few minutes, let them soak up into their pores, and then you can move from the rougher to the medium to the fine and really dial in the blades. It's nice to do that once a year, and then to do basic things in the field. Like you might sharpen your tool every time you use it, because depending on the quality of the metal and the activities, you're going to want to refine that so it's constantly at its optimal cutting ability. There are products for lubricating the mechanisms. When you take the blades apart, in between the blades, it is nice to have a hydrophobic grease. If you ever put a bike together and you put the seat post into the frame, you put a hydrophobic grease on it so it doesn't lock up in there, and so it keeps moisture from getting in there causing rust. So you can use something like that. And then for like in the field lubricating, I use 3-in-1 oil, same stuff I might use on my bike, and I'll put a little drop right there and work it in to keep it moving smoothly. This gets gritty and it starts resisting, just like with the spring. You want effortless return. The more resistance there is, the more your wrist will absorb that extra stress, so it really makes a huge difference to keep things sharp and lubricated. If you're just making a couple of cuts, none of this really matters. If you're doing a lot of work, it really matters. And taking care of your body with these kind of things is important. Final cool stuff to show you. This is from Hita Tool. This is a cleaning device. They call this the rust eraser. This is kind of like, you might have steel wool or a pumice stone. It's harder than the resin and grime and rust on your blade, but softer than the metal. There's a medium and a fine. They're a really nice addition to a cleaning tool supply. First aid kit for when you cut yourself. And that's probably, I think that's all of it. Questions, comments? All right.
If folks were to have 5 tools to manage an orchard, about 20 fruit trees that are less than 20 years old, what are the 5 tools there that you would recommend?
So you need your basic hand pruner, some kind of a medium or fine toothed saw for making smaller diameter, more delicate, precise cuts, an arborist saw for bigger cuts, and then it kind of depends. I like to have a big lopper around for cleanup. I find this is definitely worthwhile for that kind of a process. These two, extremely impactful capacity extension. And then everything else is kind of niche-y after that and site specific. If you have bigger trees, an orchard ladder would be the other thing to add in. About $300 for an 8-foot orchard ladder. They have with 2 wide feet in the back and then a single bar that's extendable that you can then adjust the angle on so you can be on uneven ground. Fancy versions of it have a pin in the bar that lengthens or shortens it for more adaptation to slope, bigger hills. And super fancy versions have adjustable rear legs as well, so you could have legs like that to be on a really lumpy textured landscape. But a basic 8-foot orchard ladder plus these basic tools will allow you to do all the work you should be doing on your orchard if you've managed the trees in a smaller, medium-sized framework and you don't have really tall stuff. There's a point at which these tools are not the right tool and I'm not the right person, and you need an arborist crew with a bucket and a bunch of fancy equipment and chainsaws. And that's for your bigger landscape trees are just a different class. This is really fruit trees and young shade trees and landscape trees and lower levels of them. It's aesthetic pruning, kind of the beautification and artistry of shaping things, and the fruit tree side of things. The arborist side of things is much more power tools, bigger stuff. I have arborists come to my workshops in Sacramento and they've never seen most of these things. Because it's just not, this is really kind of fruit tree specific and then Japanese source specific. So you kind of have to be brought into the knowledge that this exists or it doesn't, which is why we're here. So you now have been invited. Welcome. Do good things with it.
I'm spending all my next paycheck on
Ask Santa. It's unfortunately right after Christmas. We've also had some groups that weren't able to plant trees and turned their tree budget into a tool budget and have acquired some of these tools or had leftover funding from a larger build budget that they didn't need all of. So there's that option. And it's also look at the idea of community tool libraries. These are great added layers that maybe the people who put that together aren't going to think about. I'm working with 2 different projects in Sacramento to try to get sets of a lot of these things to be available for the community. So which tree you guys want to look at?
That one.
All right, this is like a pear. So with young fruit trees, the primary function is not getting fruit off of them. That's the future. The primary function of the young shade tree is the root system development and the scaffolding development. The 3D woody superstructure that's going to hold the fruit, that needs to have good, strong angles. 45 to 60 degree angles have the best mechanical strength to hold all the weight of the fruit in the future, all that stress that will be here. If it's too steep, if it's too shallow, flat, more likely to break. So ideally, you are very thoughtfully developing your young trees to establish a really good, strong scaffolding structure. Most of these trees, when we put a young fruit tree in the ground, and it's a whip, it's just a big stick. First thing we're going to do, if we want it to be a smaller, more compact environment, is we're going to make a cut between knee and hip height. So we're going to basically take the top half of the tree off. That then is going to cause a response in the tree. It's currently dormant like this when we do that. You plant it, you make that cut. In its root system, it has energy stored from the prior season. Each leaf will say is storing a unit of energy. And imagine if this was our tree and we cut it here, these leaves are gone. These leaves are still here. This little root system, if this was the whole tree, has the energy of all of the leaves, but it has fewer places for it to go. So you're going to get more vigor in each place that it will go through. Now, if this was our complete tree and we cut the top of the tree off, the tree is like, oh my God, I lost my head. And so it is going to now, where the hormones would normally have the last bud up here stimulated to know that it is the growing tip. We'll call this apical dominance. It's a hormone signals that'll cause this to keep growing and will suppress branching on most of these down below it. When we make this cut, say we make it to this bud right here going this way, now that is now the apically dominant bud. It's going to get the hormone signal to go. Because we've lost the top of the tree is like, I have to grow a new tree. So multiple buds in here will burst forth in spring with all that stored energy, pushing really strong, vigorous growth out. That gets us the strong angles that we want, those 45 to 60 degree angles. And we're going to then take the growth and try to get, okay, we want scaffolding limbs, the original structure coming off the trunk with good angles. We want 3 to 5 of those to fill the full range around the tree. So that becomes the goal initially, is to select those, and then one comes out here and we're going to develop it into that. The other one's over here, and so 3 to 5 will fill that full space. That's what ideally happens. What oftentimes happens is maybe that cut got made here, or even maybe that cut got made here originally. But then there's a bunch of growth that's happened, and maybe we have, okay, so here's a pretty good angle. This one's a little flatter, you can see. This one's a little flatter. This one in back has a pretty good angle. And ideally, they're moving out from center into all this open space. And that allows the structure we call an open vase. That gives you air and light moving into the interior. As the sun comes overhead, light comes in at these different angles, and you get kind of balanced sun exposure and ripening on all elements of the tree. This helps us keep trees smaller, more compact, fits into community spaces like this where they might be planted, 7 feet apart. In an orchard setting, you might plant on much larger spacing. Back in the day, people would let trees grow to their full standard size. A standard apple can be 35 feet tall. I mentioned I had a grapefruit that was 40 feet tall. Harvesting that fruit is dangerous. People would be on 16-foot orchard ladders. They would fall and they would break their back or their hip or their leg and they'd be crippled. People decided this is not a good business model. Liability insurance and such. So smaller trees, more trees per acre, less risk has become the norm in many of the orcharding contexts. And in the urban world, and small farm, there's a lot of techniques for keeping trees small. The Dave Wilson Nursery, which is the grower of most of the organic deciduous fruit tree stock for everywhere, but particularly for California, their website has tons of videos on different strategies for keeping trees small. They do things where they'll plant multiple trees in the same hole, and like that direction is one variety. The quality of your implementation will largely affect the quality of your outcomes with these. There's a lot of ways to screw them up, but if done well, these things can be pretty cool. So a couple of things to note right away on these trees. They look like they're in little holes. They're a little below grade. So the fruit trees are composed of a rootstock. That is where you get the dwarf or semi-dwarf element. That's where you get disease and pest resistance and climate adaptation. And then fruit wood is grafted onto that rootstock. So that scar, everything above it is the fruit wood, everything below it is the rootstock. And that tissue, the root crown, where the root system flares up into the trunk, that is one of the disease-prone parts of trees' insect attack vectors. So the issue here over time may be that these trees are a little low spot. And the root crown is going to get a little more saturated and have a little bit higher chance for fungal disease and rot. So you may want to be thoughtful in keeping mulch and leaves off of the base of the trunk so that area can dry out when I plant trees these days, I try to do the opposite. I try to have them on a little bit of a mound. So my root crown is above grade, particularly if you have poor drainage. Some trees are okay with wet feet in plant world. They are adapted to riparian ecosystems where they're occasionally saturated. Other trees hate it. And so it's important to know what you're growing and try to give them conditions that are going to help them be successful. Another thing we'll note here,
Split.
so what oftentimes happens, let's see on this one. So probably not quite as acute here, but where I'm in Sacramento, one of the primary failure points of young fruit trees is sun damage. And that usually occurs in the southwest. That afternoon sun fries the young tree. So the young tree has thin bark. As it gets bigger and older, expands in girth, thicker bark, more protection. It has a small canopy. It doesn't really shade itself. And so the young trees get exposed to that hot sun in the afternoon coming from the south to the western quadrants, and they get sunburns. Sunburn does not heal in a fruit tree. Skin doesn't regrow like we have. That wound is an opening for disease and insect. What you see there is the tree trying to callus over it, doing a similar thing to what a good pruning cut does when you see kind of an iris closing as the specialized tissue called the branch collar, this kind of little wrinkly transitional zone. That tissue has the ability to heal over cuts. So when we're pruning, particularly with a saw, everything is about making a cut that is just right. It doesn't cut flush with the tree and cut the branch collar off, and doesn't leave a longer stub that the tree isn't going to be able to swallow up. That deadwood fungal habitat, saprophytic fungi doing their job, decomposing. Many of them can shift to parasite when they find the living tissue. So we try to keep the deadwood off the trees, allow it to heal those wounds, and prevent rot from getting inside of our scaffolding and our trunk and our root system, because those are the long-term investment grade parts of our tree. And these are the ways that many young trees get wounds at an early stage that are unrecoverable, that will be a limiting factor in their long-term success and durability.
How far is that sweet spot? Like a finger length?
Think like centimeter.
Oh, just like barely.
Yeah, we could
You're not cutting it right here, but just past that.
Yeah, on this you can kind of see this zone here, which is kind of like that edge up here. So
And it's straight
the
up
goal-
and down or at an angle?
the goal with the cut is to balance a close cut but not too close with a rounded cut wound. Has less surface area. The more of an angle, the more ovalized the wound is, the more awkward that is for the tree to heal. The tissue of the tree runs lengthways. So cutting perpendicular with a perfectly round cut is going to be the hardest cut. At an angle, it's much easier. Grandma learns to cut her rose bushes at a steep angle because it's much easier on her wrist, in part. So we're always trying to balance these multiple goals of a clean cut that's going to heal well, a small wound that's just right, not too much, not too little. And if we had more time or if we did more demonstration, we could show a bunch of those things. But that's kind of one of those mechanisms of constant learning and refinement. You can hear arborists talking about the perfect cut with their saws and the branch collar to allow that to heal successfully. The bigger the cut, the longer that wound's open, the more precision is important with that, and the more a sharp tool that doesn't leave notches and grooves where water and spores can sit and start that rot process. Yeah.
Do you ever paint?
So, painting people used to do back in the day. And in most cases now, what the research has found is that when you paint the wound, well, when the inside of the tree tissue is exposed to the atmosphere, the immune system of the tree is activated. When you cover that with the paint, you mute that immune response. You also, in many cases, trap water and microbiology on the wound. So in most cases, people don't really paint anymore. There are some exceptions. If you live in Texas, oak wilt disease will kill any tree from any cut you make, so every cut is painted. So you have contexts like that where there's localized acute disease issues. Sometimes with the fruit trees, if you make a bigger cut, what I'll do is there's a product. So same with the sunburn. We used to put interior white latex paint, 1 part water, 1 part paint. Use that as a sunscreen. If you drive through the valley, you'll see the white trunks on the trees. Usually it's agricultural lime that they're using for that. In the small tree, fruit tree, orchard world, we'd use interior white latex paint. But now all the paints have funny business in them. It's very hard to just get pure latex without glossy bits, and interior paints or exterior paints will have antifungals and all sorts of stuff. So I've been using now a product from a brand called Ivy Organics that makes a fruit tree paint. And sometimes I will put that on larger wounds of trees that are more vulnerable to give it a little bit of extra protection. So if a spore lands on it, it's landing on that surface rather than directly on the wood. And I'll use that to paint the trunks. And you can also dilute it into a spray bottle, spray it on the leaves on the south and west sides of the tree during heat waves, and it helps moderate heat stress. So kind of a cool little function.
Have you ever heard of anybody using honey on the cuts?
I haven't, but I mean, honey lasts forever. There's like food in jars of honey they've dug up from 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years ago or whatever, and it's still good. So I don't know. I mean, it might attract bears to your tree if you have bears around. They're like,
That's kind
It's
of
a
what I
honey
was
lick.
thinking. Is it's gonna bring in insects and so on and so forth too.
yeah, there would be extra considerations with that.
How long does it take a tree to heal after it's been cut, typically? Like, say, on a smaller sized branch.
So it
like
depends on the rate of growth. The healing occurs as the tree expands in girth. The tissue kind of swallows up that wound.
that, like, encapsulates it.
Yeah. So it takes time. The bigger the cut, the longer it takes. Little cuts disappear. Over time, big cuts will disappear in larger trees. But the bigger the wound, sometimes that edge is always going to be open. And depending on how the cut is made, that may not heal over entirely. I go to a lot of orchards where there are cuts that have been made, like even maybe right here, this cut doesn't look like it's healing great. There's a little callousing starting, but it may be open long enough for some rot to get started. The other side of that then is the immune function of the tree, and that's where soil health comes in. The more you have rich fungal world and microbially diverse soils and mulches, and the tree has access to the full spectrum of nutrients that it needs, the more its immune function can be really optimal. Immune function, fruit, taste, flavor, color, these are all kind of higher order expressions. Stressed out trees are going to be much more deficient in those areas, whereas full soil life, better flavor, full genetic expression realized, better immune function, more resistant to those rots working their way in from different points. The more stressed the tree is, the more that rot is welcomed in, or unstoppable. So a lot of trees get really stressed out with poor care. They get wounds and they don't make it very long. A lot of public fruit tree plantings, 5 years later, most of the trees are on their way out if they've made it that long. So that early care sets a foundation that you can always prune back to, regrow off of. But if you don't get that good structure at the beginning, there aren't a lot of good options for them. Questions or even guide me. What do you want me to talk about? Because there's too many directions I can go with.
When's the optimal time to prune your fruit trees? I might have missed that part.
No, that's a good one. So there is summer and winter and any day pruning elements. Dead wood, broken branches, disease, you can prune that any day of the year essentially. The sooner the better. With like, you don't want to leave a broken branch just dangling on the tree. You're much better off to make a good clean cut, back to healthy tissue, let it start to heal that. If you leave that break open, disease and insects can get in there. If you ignore it long enough, it'll work its way into your scaffolding, into your trunk, into important tissues that you need for the future. Summer, winter pruning. So we talked about the energy storage and then the vigor of the growth when you make that cut. So after fruit has been completed its cycle, the tree is growing less in the late summer and fall. It's storing a lot of energy. It's setting buds for the next year. It's making plans for the next cycle. That energy that's stored in there, when you come in the winter and you remove, like say here, we might remove most of these upper shoots back down to lower buds. Say we cut 20% of the tree's structure off or more. We've now got 100% of the energy, 20% less places for it to go through, more vigor. So winter pruning amplifies vigor. Summer pruning, come out here in May or June or July and say, oh, well, I don't want all this height, let's prune all these down then. These are never here. They never store all that energy in the back half of summer. Their sunlight gets down in here, it stimulates growth and fruit wood down places you might want it, rather than all the light being captured up high and the energy of the tree rising up into this zone. So we've cut these off, they don't store energy. We come into winter prune, there's less work to do. We're removing less of the tree, we get shorter shoot growth that next year. Summer pruning reduces vigor, winter pruning amplifies vigor.
Is that true with citrus as well? Or
They don't have a dormant season.
Right. Okay.
So citrus, the variation is you don't have, so citrus are from tropical and subtropical. In their native environments, they flower and fruit cyclically all year round. They don't have a awake, asleep, deciduous tree cycle. And they have a little different cycles in California because they adapt a little bit to our weather. Particularly some of the lemons and some of the kumquats will fruit and flower simultaneously, where you'll have ripe fruit, juvenile fruit, and new flowers all at the same time. A lot of the other ones are a single cycle.
So pruning is...
So pruning, best done right after fruit harvest. You have less weight on the tree. You can see the structure much better. Citrus pruning, with some trees you're pruning to stimulate the growth of fruit wood. With citrus, you're pruning to remove dead wood, damaged, diseased wood, to deal with water sprouts, vertical shoots, or root suckers, to deal with crossing limbs or doubling or things that are too crowded. But after that, you're just you're not pruning to make it give you fruit the way you will some trees, but it needs all those other forms of maintenance pruning. The only time of year you don't want to prune citrus is late in the summer and fall, because any new growth you stimulate will not have a chance to harden off before winter, and they'll be more frost tender. Fruit tree differences, deciduous trees and citrus. Deciduous are like a dog. You can train them and they do what you kind of think they're going to do. They're a little more, citrus are more like cats. I don't know, why did it do that? So with citrus, I use mostly, so pruning, two kinds of cuts. Heading cut, I cut into the middle of a younger limb to a bud. That bud grows. You push things out when you make heading cuts. Thinning cut, I remove a branch all the way to where it connects to the larger structure. Thinning cut opens up space. So in citrus, I use mostly thinning cuts. If you make heading cuts, you get crazy reactive growth. You get lots of vertical crazy shoots that are less helpful. So you're better just to use thinning for the most part with them. There are, like in Australia, you'll find commercial citrus growers, they stump their citrus and then they resprout vigorously and then they just get fruit off of those. So there are different strategies, but if you want a nice big citrus that's kind of a ball, the interior, the light only gets in 3 feet, so you're kind of keeping the open interior for airflow and harvest access and the birds, and then you have denser growth on the outside where all the light and the fruit will be. Fruit trees, fruit and you get the flowers off of different tissue, so it's important to know which variety does what. So some things, like an apple or a pear, they grow spurs that they fruit off of, long-lived flower-producing structures. Some of the stone fruit do spurs as well. Then you get other trees, like a peach tree, nectarine, they fruit off of last year's new growth. So the 2-year-old wood has all the flower buds on it. So you're managing them constantly. You're removing a lot of the prior year's unnecessary growth, and you're really focusing growth into where you want it and maintaining as much of that fruit wood that has the buds on it. Other trees are going to grow their fruit on new growth. So older growth, older tree, new shoots, not a young tree, but an older tree, new growth is where the fruit comes. So a fig tree, for example, or citrus, and many others are going to grow off of that. So it's important to know what the tree is doing so you're pruning in a way that meets its real needs. A lot of people, too aggressive, not enough knowledge, less curious than impulsive, come in and cut all the spurs off without knowing that that was important. There's all sorts of stories about things like that. So important to understand what you've got, how it makes fruit, and then to prune it accordingly. Young trees, the winter pruning to amplify vigor is great. You want that vigor. You're trying to get that structure out in space. With 45-degree angles, you could have, you could be picking fruit right here. With this tree, is very vertical right now. So you have all this height and you don't have a lot of angle. So from one season to the next, it's not moving very far out from center. So the sunlight is growing weeds rather than growing fruit. And that's the idea, is to fill the volume of space with fruit wood, good strong angles, air and light can get into the tree, lots of fruit wood. Yeah.
Any advice for trimming old fruit trees?
I was just gonna ask that.
So when a tree is big enough, summer pruning becomes critical because you don't want 10-foot shoots. A lot of stone fruit, you know, they're ridiculous. If you just do winter pruning, you keep amplifying your problem. And every year it gets more and more out of control, and then you miss a year and now your tree's 20 feet tall. So you have the summer pruning to remove unnecessary new shoots to keep air and light moving through the tree, and then to manage height. Then with the older trees, you're also potentially looking at where can you reduce and remove elements of it. Say if we want the open vase, so we want this area to stay open, well, here's a crisscrossing limb from the center. Or you get something like this coming back into the middle, where ideally you're moving out here, these things are all moving you in the wrong direction. So if you don't manage those, you wind up with structure in the middle and your open vase is full. So a lot of times you can remove or reduce elements from that interior, bring the height down, and then shift down to good lateral limbs that are moving out into the open and start to reset the structure based on those. Particular trees, it's always, you got to see it to know exactly what to do, but get the dead and damaged and older wood out of the tree. And in part, you guys know the S-curve in ecosystems. If you've taken like permaculture courses or other things, you'll learn about this. So like if you're the grass, it's spring, rapid growth, flowers, seeds, senescence, brown, fire, back to rapid growth, grazing, back to rapid growth. Fruit tree pruning, similar. You remove older wood, you reinvigorate it on younger growth. You can keep, if you keep that senescent old age decline vibe out of the tree, you can keep them younger and more vigorous. The more older parts of the tree, the more rot you have, the more broken or dead wood. You know, you'll find dead stumps where there's a foot long, 2-foot stump in the tree where somebody just cut it off here, walked away. The rot is working its way in. All these things start to slow the tree's vitality down. And then you get, like when you go to the other site, there's a cottonwood over there that's mostly dead. It's habitat. Creatures live inside of it now. It's not as much of a tree on a path of being a grand old tree. It's a three-dimensional structure for creatures and critters to live in and on and interact with.
Is there any risk for like a mature tree of cutting too much?
So the general guidance has always been like not more than a quarter or a third. And I've listened to some forestry researchers and they're like, not sure if there's actually evidence for that. But what you find is when you cut a lot off of a tree, you're going to have a lot of regrowth. And you need to be there for the follow-up care to thin out the unnecessary elements and shape the good ones and guide it into that new form. And it's a lot of times what happens is people will come in, they'll just kind of like top their tree.
Yeah.
So, you know, they'll just make some cuts at the same height all the way around and walk away. And then you got all this reactive vertical growth after that. And then nobody does anything with that. And then the trees get stretched out and weird and shade themselves. And one of the schools in Sacramento, they have a bunch of common vision planted trees, which did orchard planting in prior decades all over California, and nobody's managed it. It's elementary school. They're little people. You know, maybe that is the biggest kid there. And the trees are 25 feet tall, and all the fruit is like 15 to 20 feet up. There is no fruit wood down low because the upper growth wasn't pruned off, and it's now shaded out everything below, and there's no energy in the lower parts of the tree. There's no structure for it. So they've totally lost control of it, and they've just, like, the kids just use them as shade trees with a mess underneath it, but none of the benefits are there. For a smaller tree, well managed, kid-sized, whole different set of outcomes.
Will you talk a little bit about watering
Yes.
fruit trees?
All right, so one thing I have to point out just because it's here and it's not water related, nursery stakes are only there for the nursery container. Once you put it in the ground, it is no longer relevant. It is only potentially damaging. So when you put it in the ground, take the nursery stake out. We generally don't stake fruit trees when we're training them lower the way you would a landscape tree, but if you did, you wouldn't use that. All right, water. So, when trees are young, you put in the ground, there's only water right around the root crown, the container size, so you need water in the interior. But what ends up happening is people set like a drip emitter right at the base of the tree and then they never do anything else. Or they put a little drip ring around it and they never do anything else. And our goal is to draw the roots out from center in every direction out into all the space. The same way there's sunlight out here, you want roots out here to access these resources, to keep expanding their presence in the landscape so that the tree above ground and below ground can really stretch out into the space. So what is a good way with trees is to, if you're using a drip system, you know, one version, if you've like a row, you can run drip tape kind of scenarios. You're putting a lot of water in between, which means ideally you're growing other things in there or something you don't want, weeds are going to grow in that space. One of our projects in Sacramento, an orchard at Common Ground Church, one of our compost hubs, where they have volunteers turn compost every morning. They do the super accelerated Berkeley composting. They are hardcore volunteers. They're all older folks. They come in there and it's great. They planted trees 7 years ago, had maybe 18-inch diameter drip ring, and they never added anything else, and they had no mulch on the ground. So in between their trees was bare, cracked earth. Sacramento is a lot of hard pan, a lot of clay, so if you don't have organic matter being added to that, you could trip on these cracks. They were so big. So one of our projects, what we did was we put new drip rings, so at about 3 feet out, and then potentially at about 5 feet out. Yeah. With drip, you get a lens like that underwater that slowly comes out. So we don't really need water on the root crown in the center. When the trees are older, just like these limbs, you have big roots coming out from the crown, but all the fine details are out here. That's the action. And the fruit tree roots want to reach up and find that organic matter mulched layer and be able to tap into all that dynamic energy and resources and biology at that level. So we did a compost extract drench of the whole orchard floor, put the new irrigation system in, and then are putting a layer of worm castings down and then a thick layer of arborist mulch. So the ground will be totally reset biologically and structurally and hydrologically. And so this growing season, hopefully these trees will be able to expand into this intermediate space that they've never really been able to access.
Do you want to like move it out every year, kind of? Like do a bigger drip ring every year sort of thing?
Functionally, like with a tree like this, if it's roots, we talk about like the drip line, which is not a terminus of root growth, but is at least a good concept. The outer 2/3 is where the roots are, not the inner. Even with a tree like this, it's much further out, but like this is where I'd want water. Yeah. Something like that. Some will get into the interior, but there's not as much happening there, and there's more root crown rot potential in those zones, so we like those to dry out and to not be as wet, to not have mulch on the trunk, to keep some space so that can breathe, and to focus like here, I just look at these root zones are one world, and I treat this whole intermediate space as what I want to nurture. And so then you manage your orchard zone so that the interior ground level, you're trying to get water pretty evenly distributed throughout it. The top 2 feet is where most of the fine root action is. Deeper, less frequent watering for perennial plants is favorable over frequent shallow watering. One of the great failure points in the urban world is usually lawn irrigation on trees, whether landscape trees or shade trees. That's why, have you guys seen like these crazy thunderstorms that come through in the winter with like 70, 80, 90-mile-an-hour gusts of wind? Sacramento loses 1,000 major trees every one of those. Giant trees coming down. A lot of it's because you got lawn irrigation, no mulch, hardscapes everywhere. So when you have a tree with limited root zone environments, you need that available root zone to be treated really for the tree's needs, not just for ease of human management and aesthetics, which is how most of our urban landscapes are managed.
So in landscaping, a lot of times they say not to add too much mulch when you're planting a tree because it'll keep the roots from spreading out. What would you say about that?
I do not have that concern on the surface. The issue we found, and it's very relevant for you composty people, is we don't want the planting hole to be overly rich. We don't fill the planting hole full of compost. You might not even put any compost in the planting hole. We top dress heavily on the surface. So this would be the next part we'll talk about with the tree planting, whether we do it or not. But the idea really, in part, the tree has to adapt to the native soil and its context. Ideally, your management practices are improving that native soil over time. So we try to set it up so it will explore. We don't want it to just, if you put a hole full of compost, the tree's not going to go anywhere. You want it to get out into the world, and when we go over there, I got broad forks and other things to use to prepare that landscape. But we also want the system to improve over time and to shift to a more fungal soil and to have that deeper, woodier zone. I haven't seen any issues with mulch on the surface because the roots are only minimally interacting with that layer. And its presence will improve moisture retention, reduce the soil temperatures and heat, keep things more moderate, and then as the roots extend out, that topsoil is being transformed by the presence of that mulch and the biology in there into a more favorable condition. So it'll be even better at infiltrating and retaining moisture in the future, have more fungal life, have more available nutrients. So I like them to kind of develop together over time.
So would you put like compost further away from the tree to get those roots to go out?
So typically in the hole, I put mycorrhizal inoculum spores on the roots and in the hole. And sometimes I'll make an extract and I'll drench the hole itself. Sometimes I will drench it from above after planting, but maybe I'll just sprinkle a little worm casting or a little fancy fungal compost just for a little biodiversity in the hole. Too much compost around the roots can also cause rot because you've got decomposing organisms. If your hole is overly dense and a little anaerobic in pockets, those pockets can rot the roots out. So the hole typically is only minimally impacted, but then I'm going to put, you know, a nice layer of worm castings, a thicker layer of compost. Worm castings, I just kind of put a margin of biology. Compost, I'll put a thicker layer. The Common Vision guys I worked with sometimes at schools, they'd put 10 gallons of finished compost on the surface and then mulch. So if this was a newly planted tree, I would treat the original soil out about 3 feet all the way around the tree. And then over time, you can extend that out. But at least that's it. At planting, I would do that. For this tree here?
Yeah, like right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean here you've got the issue of the hole that it's in, a little bit of a bowl. So you got to kind of play for that. But yeah, I mean, it would be great to make some nice compost extract and drench all the soil and put a layer of castings down and then bring a bunch of arborist mulch. Quick bit on arborist mulch. Anything you can buy, you don't want. What you want, you can't buy. America. So industrial conifer logging creates lots of waste products that get turned into consumer products. Redwood, cedar, fir bark, gorilla hair, all these hideous things. They're appropriate for conifer ecosystems. Conifer ecosystems are decomposed by brown rot fungi. Flowering plant ecosystems by white rot fungi. You bring conifer material into the fruit tree ecosystem and it's like alien. It's also single source, single sized, and just carbon. So it doesn't really break down very effectively. And so you probably don't have the biology you want in place to do it anyway. So when you see like redwood chips and they're turning gray, they're oxidizing. Nutrients are going off as gases rather than being disassembled, metabolized, and integrated into the soil. Still gives you the physical benefits of mulch. The temperature buffering and moisture buffering and wind protection, all that. But it doesn't give you the biological synergy layer. The other commercial bark, funny colored ones, you guys know what those are made from? Shipping pallets. Shipping industry has a lot of waste products, so they chop them up.
So it's all treated.
9 out of 10 shipping pallets are insecticide soaked. So it's like Scott's Miracle Grow is one of the big makers of that stuff. So they've got all this material, they chip it up, and then they dye it funny colors, and then the house flippers use it to give like the color scheme of the house.
Could you essentially do a cover crop and do a chop and drop mulch?
Let me finish the good mulch, and then we'll come back to that because that's a great question. So the mulch you do want is arborist mulch. It's the guys in the neighborhood chopping up the trees. It can have some conifer material, but it's better if it's a lower percentage. What you'd get would be like all the branches chopped up. So the trunk and the bark are carbon. The twiggy, branchy stuff, the 3-year-old and less growth, that's got a lot of cambium as a ratio. That's got a lot of different nutrients in it. Might have a lot of leafy green material, a lot of nitrogen in there. That stuff is dynamic. That will break down. That will be a source of fungi and epiphytic fungi and all kinds of cool stuff. So ideally, we call it ramial wood chips, 3-inch diameter, 3-year-old and less wood. That is the best fruit tree mulch. If it's coming from diverse deciduous trees, that's probably the best. Lots of leaves in the summer, great. But that kind of material is going to get really fungally active, it's going to break down, and it's going to disappear because it's going to become part of your soil and you're going to need to top it off again. 3 to 5 inches of that material is great. It's
So,
free, but you can't buy it.
If we had our own chopper, our own chipper, could
Yeah.
we do the fruit wood that we're trimming off?
Absolutely. And it's a great, when you summer prune, like if I came here in the summer, we might prune all these things down to low buds. And we'd have all this full of green leaves. And it's very easy to strip the green leaves off of straight shoots. And now you've got nitrogen-rich leaves in the summer. So I will typically use that material in composting in the summertime and then use the carbon-rich brown leaves in the fall and winter season.
Are you worried about spreading or perpetuating disease with using?
Mostly no. If you have a tree that is clearly diseased,
Don't use it.
don't use it. If you have a public mulch zone, like our local utility SMUD in Sacramento has some mulch places you can go get free mulch, you kind of got to look and see, like I'll find like fire blight, pear, well, blackened and scorched sometimes, so I try to avoid that material. But generally, if you've got a chipper or if you've got arborists, most of it's going to be pretty good. The more diverse it is, the better. If there's some disease in it, you're creating an aerobic environment. You have a lot of diversity of microbes. Those organisms are going to be food for somebody else, most likely. Sometimes with fruit trees, like if you had really bad, say this was a peach and you had really bad peach leaf curl, what you might want to do is when it drops its leaves in early summer, is rake them all up, take them off site, send them to the county, bring in fresh mulch. Reduce the return next season of that disease organism. Or make compost tea. Add some competition, metabolize them. Next.
No,
Cover crop.
yeah, let's go.
Well, restate your question for the audience.
Would you recommend a cover species, a plant species that you could grow each year, chop it, use it as a mulch, lay it down?
Yeah, as a concept, yes. I don't have the particular variety, and everywhere is different. There are some perennial covers that people will use.
Yeah.
Some folks will have. There are orchard grasses that you'll see that people use like in a lot of commercial settings that are good. There are wildflower mixes. You guys know the term agroforestry? So agroforestry, put them together. It's part, much like permaculture, it's part indigenous land management practices, and it's part modern ecosystem nerds creating multifunctional, multi-strata systems based on woody plants with understory plants and with animal integration, mimicking ecosystem functions and developing lots of different yields from the same system. You can do fruit trees as alley crops. A little bit bigger spacing, you've got a sunny alley in the middle, you've got your tree rows on the sides, and you can grow other crops in the interior, particularly when the trees are young. There's very little shade cast by a newly planted tree. Over time, the canopies get bigger. So in those settings, people will grow different crops in the interim, and then maybe they transition that to a perennial cover crop or cut flower crops in the interior. It's all going to be site and climate management specific, but there's a lot of opportunities. Permaculture food forest, the vision over there, you grow lots of interesting understory plants, ground covers, root crops, herbaceous layers, bushy, woody layers, short trees, taller trees, vines, mushrooms, all these different layers woven together. There's a sophisticated vision that is not yet embodied in how you design and manage those in your context, because all the species interactions are crazy. The diversity is awesome, but management intensive. Agroforestry, you simplify. You have, shade-grown coffee, canopy, coffee bushes, nitrogen-fixing ground cover. Awesome. Everybody supports everybody else. You can create different kinds of systems like that. So you've always got to balance management intensiveness with diversity in permaculture hippie nerdiness and find the right setting for your context or evolve that over time. But yes to cover crops, yes to incorporating more material, nutrient cycling,
Yeah.
use the ground or the weeds will.
Right.
Very important.
And you don't have to push a wheelbarrow, load in tonnage of material, buy stuff.
Yeah.
Potential contamination.
And particularly scale. The bigger scale you're working at, the more generating and cycling biomass on site.
Yeah.
No.
It sounds like you're not
Last question.
These in a hole.
Yeah.
Is there anything? What would we do
Oh.
to make this better?
Be aware that that is a stressor on the tree potentially. High rainfall events, just being aware of how your site drains. Keeping organic matter off the trunk. Let the base of the trees breathe. So like that 4 to 6 inches out to ground level can really help. Sometimes the trees are planted deeper and the graft union is low. So you have different risks with a lower tree in a depression. It's kind of the opposite. Again, we'd like to a little bit up, above grade.
Want to like add a mound now, essentially?
No, you really can't, because it's the root crown that you need to change the position of.
Okay.
So, you could scrape off the top 6 inches of soil, but that sounds ridiculous. You just got to be aware that that's an issue. That tree already has a wound in its trunk, so there's going to be some degree of rot on that edge. It's done a good job of healing over it. Soil health management for vigor, observation during high rain events to see how it plays. Apples, none of these trees are on the more risky side with that. It's just, it'll be an issue throughout their life just to be aware of.
Okay.
Mostly it's don't let a bunch of leafy material build up on the trunk and get super saturated, and then that's rot potential support, or insects can mess around with the trunk and there's no one to see it because they're hidden.
I've seen mounds planted, tree planted in the center within a larger sink basin that's like maybe predicting the size of the tree ultimately, and then kind of staggering them on the hillside to one flows into the other in a pretty nice food forest design.
Yeah, there's a net and pan design
that's what it was, yeah.
that gets water flow. So you kind of channel water towards the one tree, and then it has an overflow that slides down to the next tree, and they each have their kind of half moon
they're large,
basin.
And it's not right at the thing that was actually up on a mound,
Yeah.
but then it goes into a basin like that.
Yeah.
And it was just
So
epic.
particularly if you have more, elevation change,
Yeah,
more
it was on a
slope,
slight hill.
you get when you're on flat ground, good soil management and mulch is the best water harvesting strategy there is. If you just do that, it'll do most of it.
Okay.
We do have just a slight touch on this. I mentioned the hydroclimate whiplash dynamic earlier. We can pay attention to the weather events globally. If you're on like Twitter, X, you can see amazing video from all over the planet of what we now call rain bombs. Valencia, Spain, a couple months ago had one of these occur. They've happened a lot. The North Carolina rain event would be another example, where you're getting many months to a full year of rain within a few hours to a few days. And usually when we do water projects, we're looking at what's the maximum historical 24, 72-hour rainfall events, what's our rainfall annual range, and so these are the kinds of things that blow out the models. So it's designed for catastrophe. And so it's just being aware wherever you are, how water would behave. Just think that a little bit, like where would it go? Does your site drain? Are you in a low spot? Can you do water harvesting and rainfall retention activities upstream, up the slope to reduce the flow onto you? There are going to be edges that you can't design for, but adding that extra little bit of buffer or that ability to catch and store more of that water when it does come, because California hydroclimate whiplash estimations of our future, our average rainfalls stay within their average rainfall amounts, but they come in really big bursts and then have really big gaps. So 5 inches of rain falls in a 3-day period. How much of that goes in the ground? It's an asset. How much of it goes in the gutter? It's a liability. So that becomes one of those places where we can make marginal differences that then stretch us out into the year, into the dry season with on-site passive moisture. All right. I can say a lot more about that, but just keep your eyes open for that because that's one of our future dynamics. And so your watershed council people and their water harvesting activities are an excellent source. And you can do that at smaller scale landscape elements, and think in larger structures. Think in your grove, like I try to do groves of the urban forest. Interior to busy street boundaries, freeways. Let's look at this big zone here and think of how it plays biophysically and what we can do in that. A little different in rural context, but same idea. Think about what your land is connected to, what flows into it, what flows out of it, and you might find some leverage points in the system to work with. All right.
Yeah, thank you. To the barn.
To the next module. Welcome to the future food forest. Yay! Yay! So they're imagining that this space over here will become a food forest. We have bare root trees that they were able to buy. But when I came out here to talk to them this morning, this is not really a design yet. A guy on a tractor for his first time ever tried to create some interesting texture and dynamism over there. We've got this mostly dead cottonwood over there, and we can look at this tree and see actually a couple of interesting things. I want to come and look at our potential space, and then we'll head to the trees for a little bit of discussion. If you guys come and look at this side, you can see the process where the tree core is rotting, and the tree is trying to callus around these wounds. But the tree is much more habitat than a tree with a future. You can really see it from the other side of it is where you're really going to see that structural dynamic. This rounded tissue is the callusing, is the same function that we're trying to facilitate with good pruning cuts. And all those holes are critters, insect larvae or birds looking for them. And this is in the forest you call eventually a snag. Dead tree that's got caverns in it, that maybe a raccoon family lives down there. If it's a big enough tree, maybe a bear has a den under it. Maybe there's a nest up there in the hollow at the top of it where an owl, there's all these cool things that happen in the forest. But in this context, this is on the south edge of their vision planting area. When this leaves out, it's going to cast a ton of shade in the middle zone here. So this probably comes out. And it lets all that light come in to grow the things that they want to grow. And so then this space then becomes a design project with edges of the road and all this interior space to create a perennial polyculture, habitat, food system, community space. There's a lot of different directions you can go with these, which is why we're not necessarily just going to plant a bunch of trees in the middle of it, because that is like determining options, setting physical attributes, because trees are for the long term. So you design around that, so you want to think it through and plan it well. This site does not have water yet. They got a grant, and they're going to be bringing water from the main line on the street into the property. So that's all stuff that's got to happen. So we like to sequence things appropriately. And you do the design first. Planning best done in advance. And get the irrigation laid out, get the texturing of the landscape. The broad forks here. When possible, meaning when there's not a lot of existing roots that we don't want to disrupt, this is one of the best tools for site preparation and tree planting around. And not a lot of people use this in tree planting, but I have found it makes a huge difference. And the idea is that you guys know like the rototill. That is an omnicidal device of destruction. It eviscerates the soil structure, mixes everything together, puts all this oxygen into the soil, causing a bacterial bloom which blows off all the carbon, collapses it structurally, all the soil aggregates are lost. A lot of life disappears. A hard layer appears below the blade. You get a compaction layer if you do this in repetition. So it's not really a regenerative tool, it's a degenerative tool. It is a convenience element with consequences. So the broad fork lets us have a tool that uses your physical strength to decompact the soil to the depth of the tines. This one is 14 inches. They come in 12 inches, come in 15 inches. They come with 5 tines, 7 tines for doing root crops. These are about $300 tools these days, $200, $250 when I bought them. They are a fantastic tool for bed prep for your gardens seasonally and for site preparation for a new project. So when I do a big project in Sacramento, like a program about 10 years ago that I started with a group called the Israel Family Urban Farm, we had a program funded by the California Endowment through the Building Healthy Communities Initiative, where we did kind of like barn raisins. We built gardens for families in South Sac in the grant zone. So we would do a design, get a bunch of volunteers out and materials, and in a day we would transform their backyard area into a garden, and we'd get 6 broad forks out. So we would broad fork every bit of the soil, urban, compacted, low-life soils. If you just plant into those things, they're never going to go anywhere. They're just going to be stuck in place. So this is a tool of geological reset and impact. To take that compact layer, open it up so that the roots can move, so the water can get in, so the gases can move around, and you make a massive change in the growth dynamics of what you've put in there and of the hydrological functionality of the landscape. So imagine we had taken this tree out, we want to put a new tree here. We'll take this broad fork, and context allowing, I might broad fork 5 feet in every direction. So a 10-foot box around where I want to put the tree. So that as the tree develops, its roots can really move out into there. So traditional tree planting, what they would have you do is, back in the day, dig a hole 3 times as wide and twice as deep as the container you're putting in the ground. Well, people figured that, if you destabilize all that soil at depth, it will settle, and you plant the tree at the grade, and then it sinks, and now it's below grade, like you saw over there, creating potential rot and other issues. So now, most of the time, if you go out like with the Sacramento Tree Foundation, they will teach you to dig a hole twice as wide and to the depth of what you're planting, and you kind of compact the center into a pedestal that the root ball can kind of sit on. So you have a convincing, stabilizing element. You leave the soil out here loose, but you center compact it, and then put your tree in the ground there. So what I do in my adaptation, so I had a CAL FIRE grant in 2015 with the Sac Tree Foundation when I was working at Soil Born Farm, and we put 3,000 fruit and shade trees in South Sacramento. I got to be the first program to get fruit tree planting from the state as part of the California's Climate Investments greenhouse gas funding. So they had no details in the grant. There was nothing regenerative in anybody's vision. Soil was not really something that was considered much. So I worked with some of my permaculture friends and mentors, particularly John Valenzuela, who, if you guys go to any good permaculture program in the West Coast, he'll be the fruit tree nerd there. He's the head of the California Rare Fruit Growers Golden Gate chapter, and he's a guest teacher from the Bullock brothers up in the Northwest all the way down into LA and other places. And what we came up with is using the broad fork to decompact this wood, because like I get 20 minutes to plant the tree and then nobody's coming back. There's no site prep, there's no follow-up care in the grant, there's no resident training and mentoring. We just got a short period of time. So we decompact the area to allow that root system to move. We then dig a hole big enough for whatever container we're planting. No excess digging. So we're not destabilizing and disrupting the structure of all that soil. The broad fork doesn't disrupt the soil structure significantly. So now we've loosened this area, we dig a hole that's big enough, and then we bring mycorrhizal spores in. You can get lots of different products, and this is an evolving zone where we know that 90% of the plants on Earth have mycorrhizal partners, symbiotic relationships that almost they're indistinguishable without these. They extend the reach far beyond what the roots can get to. They move water and nutrients and information and maybe biology, like they move bacterial populations around, like the bacteria that make selenium available. We need to shoot them over there, and it's super duper complex, ancient relationships. So most of our soils are so biologically degraded that they just don't have these things around. So there are a huge species diversity. There is no optimal species, so the products are trying to pick the best generalist species. Some of them have one that they use, some of them have a mix of 10. The product I have over there from Bioorganics is one that was recommended by Michael Phillips, who's one of the great fruit tree authors. He wrote The Apple Grower and Holistic Orcharding and Mycorrhizal Planet. Sadly, he passed away from a heart attack in his orchard a couple years ago, but there are great videos of his lectures online that you can find. Fantastic holistic sprays for biological protection for your trees and stimulation to replace some of the gnarly chemical stuff that people use. So that variety has a good mix. We add that into the planting hole and on the roots.
What about like finding just like a mycelial network on the ground in your wood chips and picking it up and tossing it?
Well, the wood chips is probably going to be more saprophytic fungi than mycorrhizal species. You certainly could, and this is where some of the IMO practices and other things, like you could go find, if you had a nice old growth forest that was a similar analog to what you want to create, you could go into the duff layer and maybe gather some stuff, and maybe I would do that in addition. Add that into your compost, make extracts of that, add that in. This is sort of a foundational level, and then you can build on that. So we add that into the planting hole. With bare root trees, you can make a dip, and you could make a compost extract, add some mycorrhizal spores to it, dip your bare root in that, let it soak up a bunch of that biology, much like Chico State Regen Ag with David Johnson, putting the extract on the seeds at the time of planting, so that as it emerges, the microbial communities that we want it to associate with are exactly where they need to be. And then they tap into the photosynthetic energy flow, and they invigorate and expand and inhabit the space together. So we get that piece in. We get the ground set at the level we want, so we have the root crown, the flare where the roots and the trunk intersect, above grade, a couple of inches. If your ground has poor drainage or ponding, like if it doesn't the water's going to go that way, we're okay, it's going to drain. But if you've got a place that's going to pond, you want to have that up a little higher. So you get maybe 4 or 6 inches of mound so that your root crown is going to be able to breathe when the ground gets saturated. Makes a huge difference. Again, some trees more vulnerable than others. Citrus hate wet feet. Plums are fine with it. So you want to give that context appropriate. All right. So this is what a bare root tree looks like when you receive it. They can be younger or older, and you're going to see that by the diameter of the trunk, by the presence or absence of lateral shoot growth. The best bare root trees are just whips. They're just a single stem stick, maybe 5 feet tall, not very thick in diameter, maybe under 3/4 of an inch at the widest place up here. What happens as they get older is that they're a little more determined in where they're going, and you're receiving a structure that you're going to have to work with. When they're a whip, we make that heading cut at knee to hip height, force out low structure, get all brand new limbs, strong, vigorous growth, and we build the tree's scaffolding off of that. With trees like this, you're like, okay, maybe we've got to assess our options. Who has good 45-ish to 60-ish degree angles where we can say, okay, we can maybe prune these down to lower buds facing out, and maybe we've got to use a lot of that. We're going to probably take a lot of the center out at some point, bring them down to the ones we've got, and then in spring you might get some new shoots off the trunk that might give you some new options. So you're kind of playing the best of what I have. I'm going to shape it and keep it. I'm going to remove the things that are unnecessary. They're not part of that future, and I'm going to hope for some good new candidate shoots to emerge. So particularly what I wanted to show you here is the physical grafting legacy. Rootstock, graft, right here. This area here, called the knuckle, is kind of the scar. Now, this tissue is the most vulnerable part of these young trees. So we saw over there the sun damage on the southwest. So, orienting the tree in the hole, don't orient the tree this way. Don't put this there. Put this to the northeast, in the shadiest quadrant, away from the direct light, so it's going to have better protection. You also then, you paint the trunk. Sometimes, like in Sacramento, because it's insanely hot sometimes, and heat dome events, we have not really had much out here yet, but other parts of the world, you get stagnant air masses with extreme heat, and it sits on you for day after day after day of 110, 115, 120. Sacramento had 217 degree days a couple years ago in September. Fruit trees thought they were going to freaking die, and they blew next year's buds. They opened their buds in fall. The spring buds popped in fall, and they flowered and tried to make fruit because they thought they were going to die, and they were trying to make one more set of seeds. Same thing happened during the lightning complex fires a couple years ago when everybody was socked in the smoke for weeks on end. Trees bloomed in fall that year as well, pear trees particularly. But I've seen pear and fig and apple and cherry and apricot all respond to that heat. So we have the potential for really intense heat, which then makes these vulnerable tissues potentially catastrophically compromised in those events. So what I do with young trees now, particularly public plantings, is I'll put sunflowers 5 feet away from the tree from south to west so that by midsummer I've got dappled light on the trunk in the afternoon. Some extra biodiversity, some extra habitat, things like that. We call these nurse plants, and they're things that are there for the short term to protect the primary crop. There's lots of different strategies where you can use that, but that's a helpful way to explore how to protect a tree from damage that, again, is not recoverable. If you sunburn here, you rot, you're done. And a lot of young fruit trees do not make it to their 5th birthday because of damage like that in the first few years. If you make it through the first few years, the bark gets thicker, the canopy gets bigger, they get more shade, understory plantings develop, but it's those initial phases where they're very vulnerable.
Quick question in regards to these specific fruit trees. So since we don't have water on site, not sure exactly when that time frame is, would these go in like 10, 15 gallon pots this week?
Squat pots, meaning fatter than taller.
Okay.
So you get more lateral root growth. That's typically what I would do for temporary. So like if I was here with you guys and we'd get squat pots, maybe 7, 10, 15 gallon, depending what you had. Get decent soil, plant them in there with mycorrhizal spores, prune them, paint them before they wake up, do all that in the container, and that way they're ready whatever happens. Once the leaves come out, painting it is stupid. It's a sloppy, ridiculous job. You leave paint all over the leaves, it just looks terrible. So it's much easier to do at this point. Make those pruning cuts so that when the tree wakes up, and because it's just sunny day after day after day, spring may come early this year again, which happens a lot. So you want to have that energy flow focused. There's a limited root system. A lot of the roots have been lost. So you want to prune off all that excess wood down to the best origin points for growth on the laterals, removing the center down to the point of the best existing lateral limb, and then maybe make an extract and water that into the purchased soil, because the purchased soils are never that good, but you get one that's good enough, and then you augment it.
So would we pot it, and then because it's being potted, and do we want to wait like a year to let it grow like a root mass in that pot before we take it out and plant it?
So you want to plant it with enough time to work its roots in before it gets really hot. That's kind of our dynamic in California, is that acute summer heat dries things out, which makes them more vulnerable to the absence of care or irrigation system failures. So everything is like, how attentive are you going to be? How many days will it take you to notice if the irrigation system breaks and has got a geyser coming up? There's a saying, the fertility follows the farmer's footsteps. So it's that eyeballs per acre concept. So if you're at a spot where you're going to see things, you can be attentive. You can plant them later in the spring, and just be aware when it gets really hot. They have limited margins for drying out because the root system isn't as big. But if you get them in containers, they're going to develop roots in that space. So it's bigger than like if you had a 5-gallon pot planted in May. You're going to have a better start. You've got a dynamic here where you've got to come up with a coherent design, site preparation, irrigation system. Then you can plant the trees and everything else can happen around that. But you want to have the trees thoughtfully positioned so that they have the best chance to realize their potential. Healed-in trees should not be left more than a few weeks like this at most. It's all moisture relevant. So if you think, oh, we're not going to get these in the ground right away, get the containers, get them planted up soon, prune them, pot them, paint them, all that stuff, and then you have more of a margin for allowing this to develop adequately, sufficiently, to then make that commitment, put them in the ground.
Great.
Do you think the same sun concerns apply in like Humboldt, where it's foggy in the summer and never really reaches above 75?
It's less so. It's still going to be the afternoon sun is where your acute issues are. The other sun that can be damaging is the low angle spring suns, that like the spring ski or sunburn sun. where it's coming through the atmosphere at a sharper angle.
Okay.
More of the intensity makes it in. So that one is also damaging. A lot of times the trees haven't leaked out at that point.
Okay, so it's relevant pretty much everywhere.
So it's still worthwhile to protect them in those stages, to paint the trunks, and to think about sun protection.
Okay.
We're also at a place where heat outside of the norms is probable. This is global weirding. Acute, basically, here's the dynamic. Climate change, survival is about making it through acute short-term events that are outside of the normal boundaries of your experience. The 70-mile-an-hour winds in Sacramento last 30 minutes. Every tree that's vulnerable comes down. And then you had full sun, or full shade, you have full sun. You had a 100-year-old tree, it's going to be 2 generations before you have a shade tree of substance in that spot again. So things like that matter. If that tree had a strong root system, it could have handled those winds, it would still be there. Wet events, dry events, hot events, windy events, these are all the kind of sharp-edged, short-term events that we have to be able to navigate. So buffering those, and that's why manage carbon cycle, water cycle, nutrient cycles, biodiversity, manage for ecosystem function. From ecosystem functions, we get ecosystem services, which is the human-derived value that we receive, whether that's beauty, spiritual connection, food, building materials, basketry materials, medicinals, pollination services for the critters, nutrient cycle services, all these different things that we've identified that are benefits that we get from the landscape. Now the researchers who came up with that at the University of Vermont, the Gunn School, which is where ecological economics originated, Robert Costanza and Josh Farley and friends. Farley wrote the original paper on ecosystem services. This last year he and his team published a new paper. The key revision: ecosystem services are not things that are done for humans from nature. They are things that nature does for itself, and humans being a part of nature, we derive benefit from it. So they've reoriented the perspective and grounded it in that appropriate ecologically centered worldview. But there's lots of cool stuff on ecosystem services that you can look at, from UN agencies to global efforts, and think about in your place, you want to build ecosystem functions, carbon, water, nutrient cycles, and on that you get all these benefits, and that ambient well-being is kind of wealth. And if you as a community invest in those things, you set a foundation that is less vulnerable to the global economy, to the national economy, to geopolitical events, to elections. And you have a foundation of well-being that is culturally then stewarded, and this becomes the long-term game. How do we re-inhabit our places? How do we understand what they were long ago, understand how the indigenous populations co-evolved and learned to optimize their life within them, and then now in these changed positions and changed world, how do we create a world that works together in the future? Any other questions, comments as we wind down this phase?
One thing I would just add to the mycorrhizal discussion is mycorrhizal fungi seems very sensitive to high levels of nitrogen. So I'd just be careful with your food waste derived composts in a orchard system, something that heavily relies on that mycorrhizal connection.
Yeah.
And then that diversity of fungi, decomposers or the saprophytics, with mycorrhizal actually tend to boost its growth. So that you can kind of try to do a good thing and actually harm the mycorrhiza.
Yeah. Compost Nerd 201 is keying compost, biological communities, carbon nitrogen ratios, fungal bacterial ratios to the evolutionary context of our cropping systems. So your veggie garden wants your food waste derived, bacterial dominated compost. That's perfect for it. That's a meadow. That's the stage they're at. Fruit trees, we're looking more 5-to-1, 10-to-1 fungal to bacterial ratios. Forests go beyond that, but those kind of systems, so if you get composts that are woodier, if you're making worm castings, use a lot more woody materials in that, add the fungal layers to it, get some native inoculum from your systems. You can do IMO nerd stuff with that, or you can just make an extract from that, water that into your compost systems, water that into the root zones, build up the biodiversity to support those conditions, and then manage it. Keep adding woody materials, gather leaves in the fall. There's no salmon runs coming to save us, but you can get a lot of leaf material in the fall. So this is part of the game, is like, where are the resource flows we can tap into and channel them in places where they can do a whole lot of good, and then buffer the larger systems around. Like, you know, every tree that's a healthy tree, let's get some wood chips on that. Let's get some little bit of extra biology on that. Let's do some extracts to really dial in the landscape functionality, the urban forest health, the rainfall infiltration, and crucially, the more than human world support. Insect biomass is falling at 1 to 2% a year globally right now. You run that for a generation or two and everybody's gone. And that's from the pollution, the loss of habitat, land use changes, all the weird things we're doing to disrupt the world. So as much as, well, like a food forest, you can design habitat in for lots of critters, and you can look at the larger zone that you are embedded within, and you can do little things that touch it up, that amplify its usefulness for birds, for lizards, for critters, for pollinators, for the native bees, for beetles. Think food webs. Think ways to stimulate that, and there's a lot of cool stuff that we're going to learn and figure out how to do that. But if you always think of, like, it's not the tree, it's not just the garden, it's the larger context that's embedded within, in the close world, and then it's your bioregion, then it's your watershed. Those scales of thought are really helpful to think long-term and whole system and human and more than human world for mutual long-term well-being.
Epic.
Thank you.
Yep.